At this time, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Carole Starr. Carole Starr has a master's degree in adult education. Before her brain injury, she was self-employed as a freelance teacher and consultant in organizations. She was also a classically trained violinist and singer. In 1999, while traveling from one teaching job to another, she was broadsided on the driver's side by a vehicle going 50 miles an hour, resulting in a brain injury. In an instant, her life was transformed from active professional to professional patient. She struggled to cope with the many symptoms of brain injury and to adapt to a life forever changed. Carole was unable to return to full-time work or to music. She's reinvented herself as a brain injury keynote speaker and the leader of Brain Injury Voices, an award-winning survivor education, advocacy, and peer mentoring volunteer group in southern Maine. Carole's newest role is that of author. Her book, To Root and to Rise, Accepting Brain Injury, was released earlier this year. Her 18-year journey as a brain injury survivor has taught her a great deal about adapting to a changed new life. Today, she's going to share strategies for coping with adversity. Carole.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Weasilience. Some of you might have seen the title for my speech and wondered, what kind of wackadoodle word is that? It is my own made-up word, and it's a play on the word resilience, and that's what this speech is all about. And I promise that you won't have to wait very long until you too know the secret of why this talk is called Weasilience, Handling Life's Wild Moments. Back in high school, I took 4 years of Latin. Yes, I admit I'm kind of a geek. Oh, all right, very good. One of the things my study of Latin left me with was a love of words and a love of knowing where words come from. And I looked up the word resilience, and it does come from a Latin verb. That verb means to leap back. And that relates to the traditional definition of somebody who's resilient, because that traditional definition of someone who's resilient is somebody who adapts well to adversity, somebody who bounces back from tragedy. But I have a bit of a problem with that definition. And what I don't like about it are those words bounce back, because what they imply are being able to bounce back from tragedy, to go back to the way life used to be before a tragedy happened. And so many times that just isn't possible. Adversity has a way of changing us. In my own experience, brain injury, it was pretty much like a meat cleaver that just sliced right through my life. And it sharply divided it into a before and an after, an old Carole and a new Carole. There was no way I could bounce back to who I used to be. I'm forever changed by what happened to me. So I'm going to tweak the definition of resilience just a little bit. It doesn't have to be about bouncing back after adversity. Instead, resilience can be about learning to bounce forward. And that's what we're going to talk about today, strategies for bouncing forward. All of us get challenged by wild moments in our lives. Those life events that shake us to our core, that threaten to tear us apart. Unfortunately, adversity is just part of the human experience. But the good news is, so is resilience. So is learning how to deal with life's challenges and maybe even growing stronger because of them. That's where we're going to focus our energies today. I have 3 points that I'm going to make about resilience in this speech. And I'm going to access those points by telling you a story. I like to do my storytelling away from podium, so I'm going to step away over here. So the story that I'm going to tell you, it is a true story. Everything happened. This story happened 10 years ago, actually exactly 10 years ago. It was early March, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I woke up because I heard this scratching noise. And I was half asleep. And I thought, oh, there must be some kind of an animal outside my bedroom window. But as I continued to wake up, I had the horrifying realization that sound, that wasn't coming from outside, that was coming from inside. there was something running around underneath my bed. So in a panic, I turned on the light, and as the light filled the room, I saw a something dash out of my bedroom. I jumped out of bed, I closed the door, I jumped back into bed, pulled the covers up around my neck, and I sat there shaking. What in the world had gotten into my house? And what in the world was I going to do about it? It was 4 o'clock in the morning. It was much too early to call anybody for help. I could hear the thing in the next room and also realized that I couldn't call anybody because it was in the room where the phone was. So I sat there for a while and eventually said, well, Carole, you need to figure out what this thing is. So I gathered my courage and I turned on every light in the house as I went, and I tiptoed into the next room, which was my office. And there, running along the back wall, was this little creature. It was maybe this long. It was pure white. It had a black tip on its tail. Looked like this. For those of you who are closer to the stage, I have a prop with me today. I had no idea what this thing was or what in the world I was going to do about it. And as sometimes happens when I don't know what to do, I kind of froze for like 2 hours. I just sat there and I stared at the thing. I wasn't afraid of it. It wasn't ferocious. You can see it's kind of cute. It didn't seem very scared of me either. I noticed that it liked spending time underneath the spare bed that I have in my office. And that's where I store my gift wrap tubes. So it would go in and out of those gift wrap tubes and just kind of look out at me. And as I watched this thing, I thought, you know, I think this is a ferret. I think somebody's pet ferret has gotten into my house. I'd never seen a ferret before, but I had seen pictures of them, and this kind of looked like it. And I remembered that the day before, there'd been a big snowstorm. And I had gone out to shovel snow, and my storm door had gotten propped open with the snow. I said, I bet you that's how the thing got in here. Now, the improbability of one of my neighbors being out in the middle of a snowstorm, walking their pet ferret, did not occur to me at that moment. But I was comforted to think, okay, this is somebody's pet that's in my house. So somewhere between 6 and 6:30, I decided to call my parents for advice. Knowing that they would be awake at that hour, I would not mind a phone call from me so early. So they had 2 pieces of advice for me. 1, call animal control, and 2, stop staring at the thing. So I took both of their pieces of advice. I shut the door to my office, trapping my furry friend in there. I took a shower, had breakfast, read the paper. I called the town office as soon as they opened. They were able to come right away, was the first call of the day. Animal control man arrives. We open the door to my office. The little creature's no longer there. Apparently he could go underneath the door. So we started to search my house for this thing. And at first we couldn't find it. And I kind of half hoped maybe it was all a dream. Maybe I hallucinated the whole thing. But no, we did indeed find the beast again. It was back in my bedroom, on my bed, behind my pillow, looking out at us. I did a lot of laundry later on that day. Animal control man took one look at the thing and said, ma'am, that's no ferret, that's a wild weasel. Hence the title of my talk, Weasilience. I think I went just a little weak in the knees when I realized I'd spent the early morning hours communing with a wild animal. Now, animal control man, by all rights, he could have left right there because his job is dealing with unwanted domesticated animals, not wild ones. But he was a nice guy. He said, well, I'm here. I've got nowhere else to be. Let me see if I can help you catch this thing. So we proceeded to chase this thing through my house. I now have a new appreciation for the phrase, to weasel one's way out of something. Because this little weasel weaseled its way out of every trap and snare that animal control man had with him. So eventually, we chased the thing into my kitchen, where apparently, between the baseboard and the cupboard, there's a little space. In went the weasel. At this point, animal control man's radio crackled. He had another call. He had to leave. That's when all the emotion that had been building up in me since 4 o'clock in the morning just came spilling out, and I sobbed in front of animal control man. I think I scared the poor guy. He took pity on me. He said, well, I know somebody who specializes in wild animal trapping. I will give him a call for you. I'm not sure, but I think it was hearing the word trap, because suddenly my mind went back to my early morning hours spent with the weasel. And I remembered how it liked my gift wrap tubes. And I said, can we set a trap for it? So we got one of those gift wrap tubes, and we duct taped the end. And we put it in that corner, hoping that there was only one way in and one way out. So, animal control man leaves. I'm alone with my wildlife. I pulled up a chair, and I sat, and I stared at that corner. I cried for about an hour. But eventually, the weasel did indeed come out. And he went right into the tube. Admittedly, I had not fully thought out the next phase of this plan. To this day, I don't know whether it was bravery or stupidity, but I grabbed the end of that tube and I rushed through my house with a tube of weasel. I got to the front door, flung it open, and I launched that tube right out onto a snowbank. And then I watched, shaking from behind the safety of my closed door, as my dazed little weasel eventually exited the tube and went bouncing across the snowbanks, never to be seen again. I'm sure I gave that weasel the ride of its life. Later on that day, the wild animal specialist that Animal Control Man had contacted did indeed call me, and he was pretty impressed when I told him how I had got that thing. And I will never forget his words of congratulations to me. He had a very thick Maine accent, and he said, "Well now, aren't you a good little trapper?" So that's my story. So you might be thinking, okay, Carole, yeah, that was a funny story, but what in the world is that story doing at a brain injury conference? What does that story have to do with resilience? Well, I promised you 3 points. So here are the lessons that I'd like to share from my weasel story that I think have a lot to do with resilience, with living with brain injury, with dealing with any other kind of challenge. They are: overcome denial, observe the situation, and learn from the experience. I did a little research about weasels. As you might imagine, I've become a bit of a weasel aficionado now. And I learned that the symbolism of the weasel, it actually relates really well to resilience. In Native American culture, the weasel is a symbol of fierce courage. Every single one of us in this room knows how much courage it takes to face brain injury. The appearance of the weasel is also an invitation. It's an invitation to observe deeply, to find the hidden meanings of events. This entire speech is a deep observation on my own journey as a brain injury survivor, my own journey towards resilience. Now, I can't offer you a turn-by-turn map for how to find resilience after adversity, because everybody's path is going to be a little bit different. But what I can offer are examples from my own experience that are backed up by research that I've read about resilience. And I've created a handout with some of those links. I believe those are in your packets. There's going to be a link to it on the Vermont BIA website. And it's also, I also have some on my book table out in the lobby. So my first point is about overcoming denial. Now, in my weasel adventure, even though I could plainly see that little creature that was running around my house, I still kind of tried to deny it. I didn't want to get out of bed to face it. I decided maybe it was a ferret instead of a wild animal. I hoped it was a hallucination when Animal Control Man and I couldn't find it at first. Denial is a really common experience when something bad happens to us, like a weasel, a death, a divorce, a job loss, a scary diagnosis, a brain injury. Denial happens because reality is just too much to bear. It is too hard to process. But denial is good for a little while because it gives us that space that we need. In my weasel adventure, I think I needed that time in bed to kind of figure out what my next step was going to be, to process what was happening. The problem comes when we stay in denial for too long, because eventually denial will get in the way of moving forward. I had to gather my courage, and I had to face that unknown creature. When we're dealing with a challenge, there comes a time to accept what is, to move forward with a new reality. When we can let go of denial, that's the beginning of resilience. It took me a long 5 years to stop denying my brain injury and its symptoms. It was about 8 years until I reached full acceptance of my new self, my new path. Now, I've been living with brain injury for 18 years. And one of the benefits of that is that I'm able to look back at my experiences, and I can see patterns that I couldn't see when I was in the middle of trying to figure everything out. And I can use those patterns to help other people who are also on the path. So when I think about denial, the image that comes to mind for me is a big old rock, a gigantic wall of rock, a boulder that hinders progress. Here are some of the ways that denial showed up for me after my own brain injury. There was this frantic voice inside me yelling over and over again, no, 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 this can't be real, this can't be happening. Every night before I went to sleep, my last thoughts were, maybe tomorrow is the day that I'm going to wake up normal and this whole nightmare of symptoms is just going to magically disappear. I didn't want to admit just how confused I was, so a lot of times I tried to hide or minimize the symptoms from my family and friends and medical professionals. I flat out refused to use strategies to get things done. I was going to do things the way I'd always done them. And I thought that the only way forward was that I had to continue to try to get back to my old life as a teacher and a musician, even though every single time I tried to do that, I failed. This rock of denial is not something that you can bring down with one quick blow of a sledgehammer. Overcoming denial is a process, and one that can be really difficult given the nature of brain injury. I know that it was for me. I had to come to full awareness of my symptoms and their impact very, very slowly. One of the metaphors I think about for overcoming denial is seeds. Seeds that can take root and grow. Seeds that eventually can grow strong enough to break through that boulder of denial. When I look back at my experience, I've identified some of those seeds that helped me to break down my rock of denial. And those were to learn about brain injury, to connect with my peers, and reflect on failure. With any challenge, you have to understand what it is you're facing. Knowledge is a seed that can grow to break down denial. My own knowledge journey began, it was about 8 months after my injury, and that's when I bought my first book about brain injury. Oh, how I struggled with that book. Due to my symptoms, I was having trouble reading, still do. I had to go back and reread sections many, many times. But what I found in that book was, I found me. The words in that pages of that book described what I was going through. And I will tell you that that recognition was terrifying for me, and it was comforting both at the same time. There were times that I wanted to run away from what I was reading in that book, but yet I kept coming back to it because I was learning about myself and my injury at a slow pace that I could handle. And I think that's an important point, that when we're overcoming denial, we have to go at our own pace. Nobody can rush us. That when we try to rush the process, we just get overwhelmed. Seeds grow in their own time. The more that I learned about my brain injury, the more I wanted to know, and the more my boulder of denial cracked. Whatever the challenge is, learning about it is a step towards resilience. There is a special magic that happens when survivors talk to one another because we have a shared experience. We get it. Peers can plant seeds that can grow towards overcoming denial. It was a fellow brain injury survivor who helped me to overcome my own denial about needing to use strategies. We met when we were both outpatients at a brain injury rehab clinic. We were both in a strategies group. And once that group ended, she and I would get together for lunch once a month, and we would talk about our journey. We'd talk about our struggles, fears, hopes, and even strategies. Because her injury was a few years older than mine, I really respected that she knew more than I did about dealing with brain injury. And I wanted to reach the same level of acceptance that she had found. And she talked about needing to use strategies that reinforced what my therapists had been trying to tell me, what my family and my friends had been trying to tell me, that truth that I had not wanted to hear. I think sometimes it's easier to hear hard truth from our peers, from those who share our journey. Eventually, I joined a brain injury support group. I met other people like me. And the more survivors I saw using strategies, the more open I became to using them, and the boulder of denial cracked a little bit more. There is tremendous power in connecting with others who share our journey, and resilience can grow from that connection, when we can swap stories, share triumphs, heartbreaks, when we know that we're not alone in what we're facing. After brain injury, so many of us struggle to go back to the way life used to be. We struggle and we fail. When we can reflect on and learn from those failures, that's a seed that can break through denial. As I mentioned, for about 5 years after my injury, I tried over and over again to go back to the old Carole, to teaching and to music. Then one day, I was meeting with my counselor, and I was sharing with her a long list of return to old life failures. And she asked me this question. She said, "Is it possible for you to accept that you're not going to make a full recovery?" I will tell you that question hit me like a ton of bricks. And I instantly started sobbing hysterically. And what I realized in that moment was that my old life really was over. And it seared through me in a way that it never had before. And suddenly I understood why I was failing so much. I had thought that I was failing because I wasn't trying hard enough. That wasn't true at all. I was failing because what I was attempting to do was too much for me. It was too much for my brain. A huge chunk of my rock of denial got blasted away that day. And I finally stopped trying to go back to the old Carole, and I focused more on accepting and learning to appreciate my current life and the new Carole. Until we begin to learn from failures, we are just doomed to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. When we can reflect on those failures, that's when resilience takes root. I just spent quite a bit of time on the topic of denial because honestly, breaking through that was the longest and most challenging part of my journey. In those first 5 years, every single person who was helping me, my family, friends, fellow survivors, doctors, physical, occupational, speech therapists, social workers, psychologists, other medical professionals, every single person I saw played a role in helping me to overcome denial, to learn about my brain injury, to connect with my peers, and reflect on my failures, and eventually to fully accept my injury. So whether you're a professional, a survivor, a family member in this audience, please know that what you do, it does make a difference, even if sometimes it doesn't seem like it, because what you're doing, you're planting seeds. When I look back now, I realize just how important those seeds were, because once my own rock of denial cracked open, even though I was still dealing with all the challenges of brain injury, I became so much more open to learning, how do I live with this? How do I create a new life as a brain injury survivor? And one of the ways to do that was I had to get to know the new me. And getting to know the new me through observation was an important part of that. So, if overcoming denial was about clearing that boulder, then knowing oneself through observation is about building a brand new structure. That's the second major point from my weasel story. Observe the situation. Now, I caught my furry little friend because I observed that it liked my gift wrap tubes. There is no way I would have come up with that idea for a trap if I hadn't spent all that time in the early morning hours just sitting there staring at the thing. Self-observation is a critical skill for building resilience. And the importance of self-observation has been known for millennia. It was the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates who said, "Know thyself." Brain injury changes who we are. It changes what we know about ourselves. Suddenly we have these new and unfamiliar limitations, reactions, thoughts, feelings, fears, likes and dislikes. It took me a long time to learn to observe the new me. I needed a lot of help from various people, from my medical team, my family and friends. I also learned to observe the new me by thinking and writing about my journey, by experimenting with new activities. Observation led to self-understanding and more strategies to cope with my symptoms. My most profound and life-changing observation came way back in 2001. It was about 2 years after my injury, and that was the observation that I can draw a straight line from that observation to the fact that I'm standing here in front of you today. And what I observed in me back in 2001 was I had this new desire to use my hands. I wanted to make things, which was something that I had never had any interest in before my injury, and I had never done. There was this little voice inside me that was whispering, "Make something." No matter what challenge we face, I think we all have that little voice inside, that voice that whispers wisdom, inspiration, observations to us, that voice that can guide us towards resilience, as long as we can stop and listen to it. When I acted on that observation, when I listened to that quiet voice, that was the first time that I turned away from beating loudly and unsuccessfully at the closed door of my life and towards walking through the open new one. I think that's another important point, taking action. That observation without action, it won't get you anywhere. Even the smallest of actions can crack open new doors. I started out really small, really simple, with this paint by number. Because I still struggled with attention, concentration, and fatigue, I could only work on this thing for about 15 minutes. Then I would be so tired, I'd have to lie down and take a nap. But I loved working on this. It surprised me how much I loved working on this. Successfully finishing this made me want to do more. I started to try other crafts, including jewelry making, and cross-stitching, and photography. I've done a series of resilience-inspired photos that you'll see at the end of this presentation. I can't stress enough how important success is after brain injury. So many of us fail so much that our self-confidence and self-esteem, they are just at rock bottom. Success can be like a shot of adrenaline and help move us forward. The more success I observed myself having with crafts, the more motivated I became to continue building my life. That observation applies to so many of life's challenges. Start small, find success, and build on it. Crafts also helped me to regain some of my identity. After my brain injury, I pretty much felt like a professional patient, that I had lost who I was. All I had to talk about with others was my brain injury and everything that I had lost. Crafts gave me something new to talk about. I could talk about what I had made, what I was doing. Gave me that new identity. It also gave me an opportunity to make gifts for other people, that I could help other people instead of always having to be on the receiving end of help. I participated in an art show at the rehab hospital where I received my treatment. People actually bought my jewelry, which was so rewarding to me. As part of my volunteering at that hospital, I taught other brain injury survivors how to make jewelry. That led me back to teaching, which is one of my core identities, and it's another way to give. And I started to realize that I could still be useful in the world. It was different than it was before, but that was okay. Getting outside oneself and finding a way to give to others is another strategy to build resilience. In 2003, I participated in a workshop on creativity at the Maine Brain Injury Conference. And as part of that workshop, I had a table where I displayed my crafts. I also had my very first opportunity to give a short talk about brain injury, all of 5 minutes, And I will tell you, I was so nervous, my knees shook the entire time. It felt very risky to tell my story, to be vulnerable, to open up to other people what I was dealing with. But resilience doesn't build unless we're willing to take on some risk, unless we're willing to feel the fear and that we choose to move forward anyway. Resilience grows when we break new ground, when we push our boundaries, one small step at a time. When I spoke at that conference, it increased my self-esteem, my self-confidence. It made me feel like maybe there could be some use, some power, some value to everything that I had been through. I realized that my story had power, that I could use my story to help other people. I will tell you, even though I was so nervous speaking at that first conference, still I felt like I'm home. This is where I'm supposed to be. And I knew I could see my path forward. I knew that I wanted to do more speaking about brain injury. Sometimes it can seem like the steps we take are so small and so slow that they don't mean anything. But over time, small and slow can grow into something really big. Here's how that's worked for me. It's now been 14 years since I gave my first 5-minute speech about brain injury. In that time, I've gone from being part of panels, to giving short talks, to organizing workshops, to delivering keynote speeches. Just a few months ago, I published my first book, To Root and to Rise, Accepting Brain Injury. It's a book and a workbook really about resilience, about the strategies that I've learned in my journey to come to terms with a new life, and how can I use what I've learned to help others. It's a project, I will tell you, it took me 12 years to write this book. Start small, find success, and build on it. In 2010, my mentor and I founded the Maine-based survivor group, Brain Injury Voices. We founded that group based on an observation that we were running a support group, and we noticed that there were many survivors in the group who were ready for more, that they were ready to use their stories to help others too. As a group, we exemplify resilience. What we've been able to do is to channel all of our individual tragedies into one collective mission: educate, advocate, support, and our motto of paying it forward. We are proof that survivors working together can make a difference by focusing on whatever it is that we can do. The journey that led me to this moment, talking to all of you, began with an observation, with listening to that little voice inside me all those years ago that said, make something. Those words, make something, I didn't realize it then, but what I know now is they're about so much more than just doing something with my hands. Those words, make something, they also refer to making something out of tragedy, to using observation to turn suffering into something meaningful. Now, I certainly didn't choose to have a brain injury. None of us choose to have adversity visit our lives. But I do choose to make something out of what I've been through. Making meaning is another part of resilience. I've chosen to do that as a brain injury speaker, book author, and the leader of Brain Injury Voices. I never would have expected it, but I have found my life's work through this. But there are so many ways to make something. Through spending time with family and friends, volunteering, nurturing creativity, arts and crafts and writing, by helping someone, caring for animals, tending a garden, devoting time to a spiritual practice. However you choose to make meaning, the process begins with self-observation, with listening to that little voice inside. Within this speech, I've been building a resilient structure. What I've kind of been doing is moving from the ground upward. Overcoming denial, that was the demolition phase. Observe the situation, that was the construction phase. My third phase, learn from the whole experience, that's about looking at the big picture. It's about gaining perspective. There's always learning to be found in any life-changing event. That's one of my core beliefs. It's also an attitude that contributes to resilience. Now, learning from a challenge, of course, it doesn't change the fact that the challenge, whatever it is, kind of sucks, that it's really difficult to deal with. Having a weasel in my house was not easy. Having a brain injury has been the greatest challenge of my life. But when we can figure out what adversity has to teach us, and then use that learning to keep moving forward, that increases our resilience. When something bad happens to us, it's really common to ask, why did this awful thing have to happen to me? But the problem is that that question, it doesn't have an answer. That question leads to sadness, anger, frustration, disappointment. It doesn't lead to insight. Some questions that can lead to resilience include, what can I learn from this situation? What does this challenge have to teach me? So, can a weasel be a teacher? Absolutely. The biggest lesson that I learned from that weasel, it actually has to do with resilience. What I learned is that it doesn't matter if how I handle situations is not always pretty. It doesn't matter if it takes me a long time to figure things out. It doesn't matter if afterwards there may be crying, confusion, time spent resting on the couch afterwards. What matters is that I know I will continue to persevere and I will slowly find my way. The best way to describe what I learned from that weasel can be found in a quote from Christopher Robin to his pal Winnie the Pooh. Yes, wisdom is found everywhere. I think his words apply to all of us dealing with challenges. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. Brain injury has been the greatest teacher of my life. It has been a struggle to learn. It has been 2 steps forward, followed by 1 3/4 steps backward. But I have learned, and the lessons I have learned have helped me to move forward slowly and in small steps. And many of the lessons that brain injury has taught me, they relate to resilience. Here are 3 of them. Look for silver linings, find humor, and express gratitude. The research supports that these are perspectives that contribute to resilience. Doesn't matter what challenge one is facing. These are perspectives that I learned over time, and I learned them primarily from other brain injury survivors, from reading their books, from listening to their stories in support group, from taking in all that hard-won wisdom. Just as there were many long-term survivors who once lit the path for me, now that I'm a long-term survivor, I strive to be that light for others. I've always been a really big believer in the concept of silver linings, that some good can come from adversity. I will tell you, brain injury put that belief to its biggest challenge ever. It's really challenging to find something good in something as life-consuming as brain injury. It's very easy to list all the negative consequences. They are very real, very numerous, and they turn lives upside down and inside out. Over the years, I have cried buckets of tears. I have grieved deeply the loss of my old life, my sense of self. I don't like having a disability. I don't like the limitations that come with it. But yes, even within something as devastating as brain injury, there can be silver linings. When we can find silver linings in adversity, that gives us power. The power to see the positive. The power to assert some small measure of control in a situation that's pretty much out of our control. The power to find meaning and move forward with a new life. There's been more and more psychological research done about the benefits of being able to see the positive within the negative. And there are studies showing that people who can do that are more resilient and have better health overall. It took me several years to find the silver linings within my own brain injury. And at first, all I had to hold on to was my belief that they were there, even if I couldn't see them yet. And I will tell you that sometimes it was my belief in silver linings was one of the things that stopped me from ending my life. I had to believe that there could be some good from everything that I was going through. So if you're in that place where you can't see how there could possibly be any good to what you're going through, please have faith that you can find those silver linings. You will find them. I think of silver linings as being on a scale. kind of like a balance scale, with brain injury being the enormous load on one side, that we need something to kind of counterbalance that a little bit. Here are some of my own silver linings. Because of brain injury, I really know what it is to struggle now, and I think I've become a better person for it. I have more empathy, compassion, wisdom. Because of brain injury, I'm less of a perfectionist. I was always kind of a hard-driving type A. Now I say I'm type A minus. Because of brain injury, I've discovered strength that I didn't know I had. I did not think that I could ever accept this, that I could ever come through the grief and the loss of self. And the fact that I did gives me tremendous confidence in my own resilience. Because of brain injury, my relationships have deepened. Like so many of us, I did have people who walked out of my life, but I got closer to the people who stayed, and I know how precious they are. And I've also made many amazing friends that I never would have met otherwise. And I've met all of you today. Because of brain injury, I have a clearer sense of purpose in my life. I can't work a full-time job or even a part-time job anymore, but I have found my life's work, helping others with brain injuries. I didn't have a passion for a cause in my life before my injury, and I do now. Now, those silver linings, they might sound like, well, geez, brain injury was the best thing that ever happened to her. It wasn't. It was the worst. Silver linings, they don't erase all of the negative consequences of a challenge, but they do make them a little bit easier to live with. They even out that balance scale just a little bit. Being able to see the positive within the negative is one of the hallmarks of resilience. So I encourage you to think about what challenge you might be facing and to try to find a silver lining. Mark Twain said, "Humor is tragedy plus time." Humor is an age-old strategy for coping with adversity. When life is falling apart and out of our control, sometimes all we can do is laugh. I will tell you, I learned that lesson again yesterday. When we arrived at the hotel and unpacked our bags, I realized I had forgotten the bag with my clothes. So we had to make a quick trip to the mall last night so I could have something to wear today. So it was a good lesson in realizing that sometimes all you can do is laugh. That humor is a choice, that we can either laugh about what's happened or we cry about what's happened. Humor is like WD-40. It's the grease that makes everything move a little bit more smoothly. Just like silver linings, humor doesn't change the challenges of brain injury one iota, but it does make those challenges a little bit more bearable. It took me time, but eventually I did learn to view my own symptoms more lightheartedly, and I started by naming my brain injury. I wanted a way to describe it that would make me and others laugh, and so much of the time it feels like I've got two people living in my head. There's me, and then there's a brain injury. So, in my brain injury, she's kind of a diva. She gets what she wants when she wants it. She is the one in charge and she knows it. She's kind of a drama queen. So I said, well, let's give her a dramatic name. So I named my brain injury Brainhilda. Naming the injury was kind of a way to distance myself from it, to know that I am not my injury. And doing that helped me to find some of that humor. Over the years, I've continued to find more humor in Brainhilda. A lot of that humor centers around my fatigue. That continues to be one of my most challenging symptoms. I had a little rest before giving this speech today. So one day I told my doctor, you know, I have had so much beauty sleep over the years that one of these days, I just know it, I'm going to wake up as a supermodel. Due to my mental fatigue, I've also had to nap in many locations. When Brainhilda says nap, I must obey, does not matter where I am. Here are some of the odder places that I have rested. I have rested in a classroom at a craft store, in the coffin display room at a funeral home. Not in a coffin, there was a couch. I have rested in the bedding department at a furniture store, in a hotel bar. I had not been drinking, and the sign did say bar and lounge. A golf course pro shop, the Washington, D.C. conference room of my U.S. Senator, and most recently outside the Canadian Potato Museum. So given all that, I tell people I sleep around. My motto is one that any Star Trek fans will appreciate: to boldly nap where no one has napped before. Humor is a healthy choice that we can make for ourselves. When we can laugh about brain injury, that reduces stress, both in the body and the mind. When we laugh, we heal psychologically. When we can laugh, we are resilient. So I encourage you to look for ways to laugh, to choose to be amused. Expressing gratitude is about so much more than saying thanks. It's about cultivating a deep appreciation of what's happening right now, of paying attention to those little moments in life that often pass by us unnoticed. There's been quite a bit of research done about the benefits of gratitude, physical, mental, emotional benefits. Those can include lower blood pressure, less pain, decreased depression, anxiety and loneliness, a stronger immune system, better sleep, increased self-esteem, greater happiness, and overall more resilience against adversity. Gratitude can affect us in body, mind, and spirit. Think for a moment about one thing that you're grateful for, and notice how it changes you. When I reflect on what I'm grateful for, I feel my muscles relaxing, I feel a smile growing, I feel a lightness that takes over me. There are many ways that we can express gratitude: in turns around the dinner table, written down in a journal, observed silently during meditation, or even right now during a keynote speech. There's much that I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that Weasel came into my life, providing the fodder for this talk. I'm grateful for all that I've learned about living with brain injury from fellow brain injury survivors. To all the brain injury survivors in the room, thank you for your courage and determination. This is a path we walk together. I'm grateful for the expertise of my medical team, who have helped me progress this far. To all the professionals in this audience, thank you for your knowledge, dedication, patience, and optimism. We couldn't get this far without you. And of course, I'm eternally grateful for the ongoing support of my family and friends who have walked this road with me. To all the family and friends in this audience, thank you for the countless ways that you support the brain injury survivor in your life. Your sacrifices are not unnoticed. You are the unsung heroes of brain injury. Gratitude is one of the simplest yet most powerful resilience tools there is. Looking for and expressing gratitude, it is a choice. It's a choice that we make for ourselves. It's about choosing to find something to be thankful for, even within the midst of the darkest of feelings. It's about believing that there can be gifts in our experience, even when life is at its worst. It's about letting sadness, anger, and fear we have over what's happened to us have their place, but making the conscious decision to turn away from those emotions, at least for a short time, to focus on gratitude. It's about finding a way to live with the harsh reality of adversity. So I encourage all of you to think about ways that you can make gratitude a regular practice in your experience. Silver linings, humor, and gratitude, they're all perspectives that contribute to resilience. Resilience itself is also a perspective. It's a filter to see the world through. I have enjoyed exploring the subject of resilience, not only in words, but also in images. As I mentioned earlier, photography has become a hobby of mine since my brain injury. And taking resilience-inspired photos has now become a new passion of mine. Everywhere I go now, I see resilience lessons. So what I've done is I've put together a short photo essay about resilience. These are my own photos set to music. And as each photo comes in, there'll be a little bit of space before my interpretation of it scrolls in. So I invite you to use that space to think about whatever interpretation you might have of it. When the photo essay finishes, I've got a few concluding remarks, and then I have a special way to end this speech. So here's the photo essay. So we've been on a resilience journey this morning, starting with my funny weasel adventure, and then moving through the resilience and life with brain injury lessons inspired by it. Overcome denial, observe the situation, and learn from the experience. To close, I've written a little poem that brings together all the points I've made and combines my serious topic of resilience with a little bit of weasel-inspired whimsy. And if you'd like a copy of this poem, I've made them into bookmarks for everybody. And Trevor has the bookmarks, and those are going to get passed around. And I've also got some of the bookmarks on my book table, which is out in the lobby. So here's my closing poem. When life throws you weasels, what do? First instinct is to hide, because you don't have a clue. Emerge from denial. Look it square in the face. When you choose to turn forward is when you really start the race. Strategies are possible if you observe with care. Help can be found when you look everywhere. So learn from this moment, and you'll manage with brilliance. Then you too can proudly say, I have Weasilience.